Like Vicky said, I'm here to talk about managing DSB infestation in the Credit River Watershed. I did want to just point out that I'm not going to get into the actual management in terms of how we did the control, but if anybody wants to know any of the specifics on what we usually do to control DSB, I'm more than happy at the end to talk about that. This was more of the sort of the how we've been dealing with this particular infestation. So what I'm going to go over today is sort of a bit on the project location, go over the project, discuss some of our outreach and partners that we do, some lessons we've learned from a large-scale DSB control project, and then what our plan is for going forward. So to start off with, our project location is along the Niagara Escarpment. Parts of it are designated as an area of natural scientific interest and environmentally significant area. And it also has the southwest finger of the Oak Ridges Moraine. So on the screen, I've sort of highlighted the area, but you can sort of see the pink is where the Niagara Escarpment is, so everything below that line. The Oak Ridges Moraine is peachy colored, and then the blue and the green are the ANSI and the ESA. So to further on that, there have been 11 centers of biodiversity that have been identified within the Credit River Watershed, and this project happens to also be in one of those areas.
Freya,
see the slides? Awesome. Okay.
Freya, sorry, we can't see your slides.
I just saw that note. I will see if what it says on that delightfully big thing. I don't understand. Excuse me. Have you shared it? It says it's.
Yeah. Are you going through the slides?
Yeah, I was. Can people see it at all or no?
Now I can see the slide project location setting the stage.
Okay. So if I make that big, can you still see it?
Now I can see it.
Okay. Not sure where that went. Okay. So what I was just talking about then, sorry, was this map. So you can see the area, the Niagara Escarpment is below the pink. Oak Ridges Moraine is to the east side, and then the blue and the green are outlining the ESA and the ANSIs. And then I was getting to our Center of Biodiversity. So CBC's identified them throughout the watershed. We're looking at the Forks of the Credit one, which is in the more northern part up in Caledon. It's got the red around it. And centers of biodiversity, there's a definition across the bottom if you want to read that and what they are. But basically, it's sort of a large area within our Credit River Watershed Natural Heritage System, which are the green areas throughout this map, that show sort of areas of high native biodiversity, and there are areas that we are trying to improve the quality of them as well as increase those areas. So that's showing that area there. So this is just a close-up of the area that our project is located in. So it's the Forks of the Credit Center for Biodiversity, and this is where we focused our DSV control on. Can everybody still see the presentation? Yep. I'm getting worried. Yep. Okay, perfect. Great. I just want to double check. Getting nervous now with all the glitches with the program so far. So it's a high quality habitat, and we've got lots of species at risk, lots of rare species, significant wildlife habitat, and it's a priority for conserving as a healthy functioning ecosystem. But this is something we have to balance with this high quality habitat, but also the people who live and visit this area. So it's a desirable rural area to live, as well as many people come to this area to do stuff in nature. So they're attracted because there's lots of natural beauty here. Obviously, human disturbance can lead to the spread of invasives. And here we've actually got our Dog-Strangling vine concentrated along the Bruce Trail, and it's been using the Bruce Trail as it needs to be transported, and it's actually linking the two epicenters of this infestation. And some of those areas I've got listed off here that are attractants to people coming to the area are the Forks of the Credit Provincial Park, Bell Fountain Conservation Area, as well as a couple of trails. And then there's also a couple of private sort of clubs that also use this area. So going back to the map, the ski club's pretty obvious because of the ski runs there. Forks of the Credit is this area up here. Then we've got the Bruce Trail basically runs along through the center of this. connecting our two areas, as well as the Caledon Trailway, or the Cataract Trailway, which leads from the town of Cataract out towards Laura, and then you also have Bell Fountain Conservation Area down sort of in that lower area of the street. So when we get to our actual project, what started off was we had someone who went for a walk on the Bruce Trail along the road right of way by Escarpment Side Road and noticed a small patch of DSV. So in 2011, we excitedly grabbed our backpack sprayers and went out to control it because it was like this small little infestation. We were going to get it before it took off, especially because it was on the Bruce Trail. Unfortunately, when we arrived, we realized it was not as small as we thought, and it was spreading into a neighboring plantation. So we worked with our outreach staff to get permission to access. There were 7 properties that we started off with to map that infestation in 2011. So then from 2012 to 2015, we had ongoing discussions with the affected landowners. We were actually approached by a board of a local residential co-op when we were doing our door-to-door knocking. They then came back to us, and we worked with all the affected residents to get MOUs, which are memorandums of understanding, to allow us to come and try and deal with the DSV on their property. We actually had 3 landowners who, in this time period, took the initiative to control their DSV on their own properties. However, because it was sort of in the early stages and we weren't heavily involved, they didn't do it consistently, and so we had mixed results from the work that they were done. Some of them actually have continued on with the project and are quite successful. There's some of the properties that have pretty much eradicated it from their properties in the past few years, but some of the other ones not the case. We were also sort of in the same time frame doing stuff at Forks of the Credit Provincial Park. So in 2011, once again, a dog walker happened to see some in the park and let us know in 2011, and we mapped it that same year. Then from 2012 to 2015, we were going out and spraying the DSV that we could find within the park. So in 2016 is when we really sort of got going on the project much more substantially, because we were finally able to get some grant money. So we had just over $20,000. You can see there the different donors. We set up photo mounting plots on the private properties. We inventoried 146 hectares of other private properties to try and find where the infestation, sort of how far it expanded to. We also did a inventory blitz community work day at Forks of the Credit Provincial Park, because we've been finding every time we'd gone out to treat it, there were always little spots where they would just pop up and we would see a new patch and a new little one. So we really wanted to get a handle on how bad it was at the park. So we partnered with the Forks Staff Power, which is a local NGO, Protect Our Water and Environmental Resources, and the Halton North Peel Naturalists to do the blitz to find out how much of this property was actually impacted. We also used those funds from our grants to treat 6.15 hectares on the private properties, and that was what we knew of at that point. And then we, along with some of the Forks staff, treated 78 hectares at Forks of the Credit Provincial Park. So this map shows sort of what had happened prior to 2015. So in 2012, when we had mapped out, 2011, mapped out on those 7 properties, and then we remapped those properties in 2016 just to sort of see exactly what we were dealing with. And I just want to note that the polygons are made from taking the most exterior patches, so it's not saying that entire area was 100% DSV. It was just taking all the points and sort of getting the outline area of where it extended to. That being said, there's also a couple of properties, these 2 on Escarpment Side Road and then another one on Southridge, that we had not inventoried in 2012, 2011. So those ones were added in. So we now know that the DSV was also in those properties, but at the time we didn't have permission. So we were dealing with what we had at the time. So this is a map showing what we sprayed in 2016 on Forks of the Credit Provincial Park. So their boundaries are all in red. The red is the patches or polygons of sort of where the DSV is located. We had before 2016, been spraying sort of the major area was here along the edge of the forest, which makes sense, blown along, stopped by the forest edge, which is quite a steep ravine slope. And then there was also a couple patches on this sort of one of the main trails. But other than that, we had not, we're not aware of the rest of it, but we'd been sort of seeing it pop up on this trail into the middle, which is why we decided we really need to find out how bad it actually is at the park, which turned out quite significant. So in 2017, we applied again and got some more grants. So we got just over $43,000. Once again, we did our photo monitoring of all our plots. We did quite a lot of inventory of other private properties. We had really good success with getting landowner permissions. So we did 237 hectares. We also inventoried 9 kilometers of the Bruce Trail using community members and local youth. So we held 6 events to do that. And then our contractor treated 20 hectares of private property, and the Forks and CBC staff treated 124 hectares at Forks of the Credit Provincial Park. So some mapping from 2017. This map, I've got blue stars indicating the properties we had inventoried in 2016. And then all these sort of lighter bluey color are the ones that we did in 2017, with also the infestation amounts listed on it. Just to sort of give an idea, even though we scoured that whole property, it wasn't everywhere on each of those properties. Some of the properties actually on Southbridge over here, you can see only have like 1 point, and this one actually had none. So we were getting quite confident in sort of the outer edges and some of our infestation areas. So this map shows what we did at the private landowners. So you can see in green what we sprayed in 2016 and then what we sprayed in 2017. So obviously twice the amount of money allows you to spray twice as much area. Some of it we just scoured. So some of the areas, yes, there were a few isolated patches, but we scoured that entire plantation as well as along the fence line just to make sure that we got everything. So we were able to have our contractor cover more ground to make sure we had a better control of the areas that we could. But once again, obviously we had not treated the entire property. So 2018, we had some more grant success. So we also had, which is really exciting for me, was that 3 of the private landowners contributed as well. So we had just under $35,000 donated for or funded for the project. Once again, we did our monitoring plots. We did some inventory. It wasn't as much as in the past. We had less success with door-to-door outreach as well as mail-outs. And we actually ended up doing an extra event to try and raise more awareness. But we only ended up inventorying 108 hectares on private property in 2018. We did have 13 kilometers of trail assessed with over 4 or 8 events. And our contractors and landowners, we actually had one landowner who treated his own property and another one who just paid for the treatment themselves. So we treated 30 hectares of the private properties. And then at Forks, we did 34 hectares. Last year was a really hot year, so we had shorter days, unfortunately. We were finishing up at noon just based on how hot the weather was. So this map shows the different inventory parcels over the 3 years. So 2016 is that lighter yellow. Forks is outlined there in green as well, the property. The rest of the properties are private properties, so we didn't identify those. And then 2017 is that yellowy color, and then the blue is what we inventoried in 2018. And in terms of control, this on the right here is what we did at Forks of the Credit Provincial Park. And then over on the left is what we had our contractor spray on private areas. And we were able to really excitingly get some entire property scoured, which was really nice to finally be able to do. So I have a few photos just to show the difference at some of the properties. So these are set up from our photo monitoring plots. So obviously you can see the before, got the DSV here. After, no DSV, that being said, we know there's some in the seed bank. So it's still being monitored to make sure that we spray it if it comes back, if we get the funding, that is. Another site, this one's related to another plantation, but in the before you can see all the DSV is quite low, but it's quite dense. There is some shrubs growing in the back, which in the after you can see how much lighter and sparser it is. You can see through to some of the trunks of the trees and behind. The other thing to note on this photo is there's patches of garlic mustard popping up, unfortunately. So we did discuss with this landowner that, yes, we're controlling the dog-strangling vine, but now you also have garlic mustard as an issue on your property. This one is a more open area. This was the before photo, so the DSB is sort of scattered throughout here. And then there was lots of little seedlings and some seeds in here, which are hard to make out in the photo. Obviously, there were some other species growing as well. This is after 2 sprays, so quite an extensive part of that property was sprayed, as you can see. But this was this past year, so as you can see, much less had to be done. So it helps, I think, to see that, yes, we might be doing quite a bit of damage one year. It doesn't always mean that it's going to be consistent. And luckily, in the open area, things have grown back in quite nicely. So from the outreach and partner side of things, we have ended up partnering with POWER, which is Protect Our Water and Environmental Resources. And I already said they're an NGO, but they work in Halton and Peel, and they've become a great partner with this project. So they've been donating staff time as well as money, and they're active engaging the local community and spearheading the citizen science portion of this project. So they've done a really great job helping us getting others involved. So it started in 2016 where they came on board to support the Blitz event at Forks Lake Provincial Park, which sort of made them aware of how bad the problem was in the area. And so they jumped on board, and since then they've been manning an educational booth at Forks. So in 2017, they were there for 7 days, and in 2018, they were there for 6 days. And then there are the numbers of how many people visited their booth over those time periods each year. And then on the Escarpment Side Road community side of things, they've also been hosting trail and road rallies in that community area. So we partnered with them and did 6 rallies in 2017. So 9 kilometers of Goose Trail were inventoried, and then in 2018 we had 8 rallies and we had 13 kilometers inventoried. Then they also co-hosted a Cedar Drive engagement event, and that was because we had this sort of cul-de-sac with lots of small properties, and we weren't getting much sort of response from our usual methods of trying to engage landowners, so our door-to-door, and so we do mail-outs and then we do actual door-to-door in the evening, trying to engage people, letting them know what DSV is and what the problem is. So we were trying to get that community or that road a little more invested because it was so many properties. So we had a small event. It had moderate success. It was once again in the evening to try and get people when they were home. So some of the things we've learned is you do what you can with what you have. So ideally, we like to work from the outside of an infestation in. The reality with this project was that we had landowner permissions, that we had the infestation knowledge, so if we even know where it is, as well as funding qualifiers dictate where control occurs. So some of the funds would only allow you to do treatment on one area because the next year you would have to apply to a different project. And a different project, even though it's the same project overall, it had to be on a different part of the property or a different landowner altogether. So little things like that kind of got me glitches. So what we did is we started with our known mapped properties, and we used those to apply for grants. And then we used the awarded funds to focus on those high use areas, so the Bruce Trail or the trail systems, where we know seeds are going to be transported easily. And then we also sort of picked out some of the smaller infestations that we could easily access. And that was because we just didn't get the sufficient money to do the entire area. So our next ideal that is not what happened in reality is that we like to do 2 to 3 herbicide applications a growing season. However, for this project, with the costs of having a contractor come in, as well as the amount of available funds that we were able to secure, we were only able to do 1 herbicide application. And normally I like to get in 3 applications for really dense infestations to really try and deplete that seed bank and really see what's coming up. And it also allows you to kind of catch if there were some that were shorter earlier in the season and you missed them, then they'll grow in a bit more and there's a better chance that you'll see them. So usually we do that for 2 to 3 years, and then after that we'll go down to 2 visits a season. However, we didn't in this one because we couldn't even get the money to do all of it once. So there was definitely not going to be multiple visits. So next up I have, we usually, ideally, like to control the entire festation up to seed source. Obviously, you want to get it all, especially with Dog-Strangling vine, where it can create so many seeds every single year. However, the reality was we're still determining the extent, and we definitely do not have the sufficient funds to make that a possibility. So funds are definitely our biggest issue. We've had a fairly positive response from landowners allowing us to access their property and even control the DSV. But the amount of money we have to do the control on each property is much more than we've been able to secure. However, as I had already mentioned, we did have great buy-in from not great, but some buy-in from the landowners. So although it was not a lot of funds, it was only $5,000 in total, but it was really nice to finally see landowners contribute, and we could then use those donations to match what we were asking for in our funds. So that really helped significantly. And it may be a coincidence, but I like to think it's because after 2 years of control, we finally were getting landowners to give us some money and put some money into projects because they were seeing a change on their properties. So the next one is that we usually control something until the seed bank's depleted. But the reality for this project is that we've had ownership changes over time and those funding restrictions, meaning that that is not always the case. We had quite a few properties change ownership over the 3 years that we've been doing control. I was surprised actually how many people come and go in these neighborhoods. We've also had some that went up for sale, and so then they would just not want us to spray because obviously they don't want somebody coming to check out their property in this nice, pristine to some people, but this nice, lovely, natural setting, and then there's big brown patches where we've been spraying the DSV. So we actually had 2 properties this year where that was why we ended up not doing any control on those properties. So overall, this is definitely not how we like to be managing DSV, but with the positive responses we're starting to get from landowners, and not to say that there haven't been some negative ones as well, but overall we're getting more and more buy-in nature, so it's sort of keeping me invested in the project and hopeful that we can make a difference. So my next lesson learned is the fun of DSV. One thing which I didn't realize you could do is that you can kill it quite late in the year. This wasn't done on purpose. It was that in 2016, we received our funds mid-August. So by the time we'd hired a contractor and sprayed it, it was much later in the season than we normally spray Dog-Strangling vine. In some areas, we had the usual dieback within the 2-week window, sort of that yellowing. But others, they stayed nice and healthy green. So we were getting really worried. Was it because it was a warm fall and it was just really hot when they went out to spray, or the fact that it's now in September and really we probably shouldn't be spraying the Dog-Strangling vine because they just did not yellow with other patches. And we checked with the contractor multiple times, making sure they had sprayed those areas. We were smelling the plants, which would have looked ridiculous to anybody walking by to see a couple of us sniffing Dog-Strangling vine, trying to decide if we could smell herbicide on it or not, which we thought we could. Might have been in our heads, but that's all right. But come spring, when we went back, all that was popping up were those seedlings. So we were relieved to find out that you could do it quite late in the season, and it doesn't always seem to appear dead right away. And we have noticed that in other times where we've been worried that it doesn't seem to be dying back when we expect it to. The next one is it's much easier to manage and forest than meadows and open areas. The wind is a pain. It moves it around. It transports it further than I'd like. But we've also found that with the regen of other species, it's much slower, obviously, in the forest habitat. And the ground vegetation doesn't tend to be as thick as you get in an open area, where you have to pull those long grasses and forbs out of the way to spot any small seedlings. So we've been finding much easier to do it in forest. That being said, if it's in a dense plantation with lots of low branches or lots of other shrub species in the way, then it's not so easy to walk through. But it's still where you find once you spray it, it's much easier to manage the actual control of the DSV. And the last one is it grows everywhere, which I guess probably everybody's like, well, of course it grows everywhere. That's why it's invasive. But one of the things I've been surprised at is that if you think of it as a terrestrial plant, so it's going to be growing in terrestrial areas and maybe into moist areas. But we've actually found it growing in an area that consistently floods every spring with at least 3-4 feet of water, maybe not 4 feet everywhere, but it definitely is an area that's soaked and sometimes flooded until June. And usually June is when we start to go to spray the thing, and here it is just waiting for the water to die back or to draw down, and then it pops up. So we've been shocked that areas that we didn't think we would see DSC, we have seen some DSC. So this map I threw in just because it's actually just one landowner's property. But you can see the blue is the earlier recording. So this is like a 100-acre property, just to give you an idea of scale. It is a beautiful property with a lovely view of the rolling hills of Caledon overlooking Toronto and the skyline. So worth lots and lots of money. But they had a few, the blue you can see is kind of scattered, not much in the field area. When we went back and mapped it in 2016, we could not believe how much it had spread. And some of it, yes, there's some inconsistencies. They did have their landscaper do some control. That being said, they only did a little bit, so it was here or there. And when you look at it holistically, obviously the landowner was like, well, this isn't working. But we are not sure exactly how the landscaper did it and how often they did it. We know it wasn't enough to make it successful, as it is significantly spread over that 4-year time period. And the irony is that whole 100 acres, which we walked the entire thing, sometimes having to climb over honeysuckles and buckthorns because the DSE was so thick in this area. I have some entertaining pictures of my staff who have fallen through and are now stuck in a hole at the bottom of a honeysuckle. But there was only one tiny small field down here where we didn't find lightly scattered Dog-Strangling vine. It was just everywhere. It was quite depressing to see. So on that nice note, going forward, so in 2019, it's quite up in the air because we haven't received many grant options. There hasn't been much announced, which is starting to get worrisome because if there isn't available money, then it's going to make us hard to do more control. We are going to continue with our inventory efforts and our landowner interactions. We want to keep the momentum going, try to keep them engaged, and we're going to continue with some of the DSE control at the Credit Provincial Parks because we have the funding in place for that. And we're also looking to securing a large private funder. So we're looking at other options. So we're not running after those 5,000 to 25,000 grants annually. I would love to not have to write 5 or 6 reports on the funds. Not that I don't appreciate the money, but it would be great to sort of have a more secure, consistent funding. And obviously, if we have more consistent funding, then we could actually have a consistent spray program where we could actually follow those best management practices that we usually are preaching to others. It just hasn't been happening in this situation today. So looking forward, we realize that it's not how we would normally do it and it's not how we usually do it, but we are still invested. Some of the properties have got their infestations under control, which is really nice to see. And we are starting to get the landowner engagement increasing in control efforts, which is allowing us what funds we have found have been able to get to be spread further, which is great. Getting to some new properties that way and finding the outer edges on some of the areas has helped sort of make us go, okay, thank God this isn't just going on for kilometers and kilometers. And we sort of have that hope that if we keep going, that a biocontrol and or consistent money, either or both, that we'll have saved this important natural area because it is a really nice area and there's lots of things to protect in it. So since 2016, with the help of our partners, we have engaged 59 landowners, secured over $96,000 in funding for the control efforts, and we've inventoried over 400 hectares of land, and lastly done control on just over 200 hectares of land. So we've had lots of successes. We have had some landowners be not so keen on the project, but what we're trying to do is change people's points of reference on property management. Everybody goes out and mows their lawn weekly. They cut down the hazard trees. We repair our houses, our driveways. And so to me, I'm trying to push that invasive plant management should just be part of your property management. Some of the pushback we've gotten from landowners is, why should I bother if it's on my neighbor's property? Well, you don't say that about mowing your lawn. You don't say that if, there's a tree that's going to fall and hit your house, or even your garden plants, right, with your landscaping. So we're trying to get people to realize, yes, you might have invested in this expensive property in this beautiful area, but if you want it to stay a beautiful area, then maybe managing the DSV will be beneficial not only for the ecological reasons, because we find that a lot of people, they might like living in the country, but the plants are planted. The plant is green, it's good. But there are the ecological benefits as well. And so if we can get them to change their perspective on what property management entails, and include dog-strangling vine, then we're hoping that we can get further with this project. So on that note, that brings me to the end. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to take them now.
Okay, thank you very much, Freya. So if you have any questions, just put them in the chat box. And it looks like we have one. Are you planning to follow up spray sites with native plantings?
I would love to. It depends on the location. We're sort of not at the point in the management where I would be confident in doing any herbaceous plantings or any tree or shrub plantings, just because usually I like to get in maybe 3 to 5 years of control for dog-strangling vine before I start doing any plantings, just to make sure we've gotten that seed bank. Also, the fact that we're struggling just to get it controlled. We're sort of not at the restoration side of things. In some of the areas, we are finding in the fields and stuff, things are regenerating quite nicely. Some of the areas are plantations where there's nothing growing under them and they need to be managed properly as a plantation before I would suggest any plantings under those anyway. Unfortunately, the densest areas are in the plantations or in the fields. We're finding the natural hardwoods, it tends to be where it's lighter. It hasn't taken over those areas as much, so they'd be less need of restoration plantings. But yeah, with the plantations, they need a lot more work from other standpoints, just in managing a plantation, let alone, because there'd be no point in trying to plant something under how dense the trees are at this point.
Okay. When you sprayed into September, were the leaves turning yellow or still green?
They were still green. So we definitely were looking at it very carefully. When the contract was going out, any plants that were wilting, they didn't bother spraying. So we were only planting or spraying in areas that were tended to be nice shaded. They were still looking quite healthy and happy. It was sort of because we were trying it so late, we thought, well, we'll give it a try and see how it goes. We finally got the funding. It had been one of the grants that we'd been turned down to originally, and then they came to us in mid-August being like, hey, could you still use the money? And we're like, we can try, but of course things take longer for hiring the contractor and getting all the permissions and approvals and letting landowners know we were coming out. It took a bit of time. But yeah, so we were quite surprised and happy to see that it was still successful, because we were pretty worried for a bit that we had just spent $20,000 and it was not working. But yeah, it turned out okay.
Oh, good. What are your restoration objectives in terms of SAR and other species? Can you quantify these, or are you just measuring hectares treated?
So we have the areas where we are controlling. There are no species at risk right now. I guess you could say there are monarchs in some of the fields, obviously, but other species that are species at risk, we haven't been impacting them directly. We did get excited when we saw in some of the fields when I was going to do some monitoring that there were still monarchs near, obviously not in the areas we sprayed, there was no milkweed, but there was milkweed nearby, and there was monarchs and caterpillars and everything. So we haven't been doing any qualitative or quantitative measurements in terms of how things are impacted. It's been the photo monitoring, and it's just been the areas that we've been controlling. We have tried to expand our grant sources using species at risk stuff, but we haven't been successful. And I think it's because we haven't been directly creating habitat for species at risk at this point. Obviously, with time, those areas would be, but at this point, we're still dealing with the DSC. And a lot of it is also plantation that has been heavily impacted, like I said. So there's no species at risk in there at this point, anyway.
Yeah. What herbicide did you use?
Glyphosate.
Glyphosate. And what percent?
3.
Percentage of glyphosate?
3%.
3%?
3 to 5. We did up it because we were getting worried, but usually we use 3% to 5%. So it depended on sort of the factors of how weather was and stuff like that.
Okay. Did you use backpack or handheld sprayers? And approximately how many seasonal staff worked on this project?
Oh gosh. So the contractor used backpack sprayers. They also have a tractor unit that they would spray behind the tractor in areas they could access on the private properties. For my staff, we use backpack sprayers, and we have an ATV sprayer that a tow behind unit. So once again, at Watershed Credit, we could use the areas that are heavily infested. We would use our ATV sprayer, and then the areas where it was more lightly scattered, we would, and for scouring throughout the whole field, we would use the backpack sprayers.
Okay. I have a question about, in the abstract you gave me, you mentioned that you deviated from some normal best management practices. What were some things that you did differently?
Yeah, so those were the things I'd mentioned. I don't know if my screen's still up, but the ideals, these guys, so working from the outside of an infestation in is something we usually do. The 2 to 3 herbicide applications is something we would usually do. Obviously, controlling the entire area. Those are the things that to me we would be deviating from best management practices. We don't normally do any of those things, but it sort of just turned into that's what we could do with this situation. So we were sort of trying to make the best of it.
Okay. What did you use to GPS the area?
So for the first few years we had just Garmin GPSs, and then I guess it was 2 years ago now, essentially, I think it was, we switched to tablets. So the first year of tablets, we used Map It Fast program, and then CVC had a corporate directive where we switched to all tablets would be using Arc Explorer and Survey 123. So that is what we're now using.
Okay. Are there any more questions from anyone? Oh, wait another minute. Any observations when dealing with volume monitoring?
Sorry, any observations? Volunteer monitoring?
Volunteers. Sorry.
Yeah. So because we've been letting Power sort of take the lead on that. We have found, so we've done in the past, so we were using CYC, so students, and then volunteers, that sometimes it gets boring when there's not a lot of something. So because if you tell them, oh, you're going to look for this plant, and then you never see it for 3 hours, it's not the most exciting event. So what we actually did is had Power staff would scope out some of the areas, just to do a slow drive by if it was on the road. Because if they're seeing absolutely none, then there's no point in sending volunteers in there. And then just trying to make it engaging, showing them other things and chatting about stuff along the way was sort of how we tried to keep students involved and engaged. In terms of adults, they're a little more happy to just go for a walk in the woods. And when you spot them, you spot them.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you're looking for, John, or is there something else you were looking for?
Great. Yeah.
Oh, the next one, volunteers. We did not use volunteers in our spray control options. We also didn't have our volunteers go onto private properties. The only people we had that weren't technically CVC staff or park staff spraying was the Power staff. So we did have them come out onto the forks of the credit property, but that was with permission from fork staff that they were okay with volunteers. We don't let volunteers use spray equipment, sort of at CVC. That's something we just aren't comfortable with. There's too much safety side of things. We have everybody trained up, and so that's just somewhere we don't go. And then obviously on the private lands, we were using a contractor.
Okay. Did you have volunteers speedhead collect?
No, we didn't. when they were out inventorying, they were collecting them. But yeah, we didn't have them like scouring larger areas to look for other seeds. No.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions? Oh, how are you responding to recent studies and advocacy that glyphosate should not be used as it is a health concern?
So we've actually had, that's a fun one. We've had some people with some pushback on that. So we did further research, and from what we can see, we're not obviously chemists or people in the health world, so our specialty is not in that area, and these herbicides have been rigorously tested, and until we are informed by sort of Health Canada, those types, we're going ahead with using them. We are also using them in very small amounts compared to sort of the agricultural industry. So, so far, we sort of just discuss with them, depending on which one it is they're talking about, sort of abusing or whatever, depending on what is somebody's specific issue with glyphosate, then we sort of focus on that. But yes, the overall statement is that we're leaving it up to the experts on determining, and we wear proper personal protective equipment, and so we are continuing to do that.
Okay. You mentioned biocontrol as a future option for control. Is there a particular method that you're exploring?
We're not. We're hoping people like Sandy Smith will be able to get us somewhere. I know that there's quite a bit of research going on it, and they are doing releases. And so we're hoping that hopefully, I believe I've heard that it might be in the next couple of years. So we're crossing our fingers with that.
Okay. Are there any issues with DSV coming within proximity with creeks and streams? How does that impact monitoring and control?
So far, luckily, I don't know if it's just luck, but a lot of the properties where there is water courses, those water courses tend to be in nice, dense cedar thickets. And so it hasn't been an impact yet. We haven't had any. Usually, our rule of thumb is a meter buffer. So for glyphosate, when you look on the label, even though backpack sprayers are listed as a acceptable source, that we sorry, I started reading the next question and distracted me. So we are using the smallest foam, which is with boom sprayers, which gives a 1 meter buffer. So that's what we tend to use normally. We just haven't had it to be an issue at this point in this project. So hopefully, fingers crossed, it stays that way. There have been, I think, a couple of locations of it right along the main Credit River. So we haven't gotten to that area to treat yet. So if we did, we would start doing hand wicking of those areas, but we haven't had that as an issue.
Okay, thanks. And considering the large area you treated, did you use regulated?
Yes, so that's a fun one. Signing at Forks of the Credit Provincial Park is a daunting task. In the past, before Fort staff joined us in the control, we were in charge of signing it. So it was a lot of signs because when you look at the standard regulated sort of how often you have to post, if it's fenced in, it's supposed to be at all the entrances, but when you're in a park and there's a bajillion trails, what we end up doing is posting at any intersection, and then basically if you're standing at a spot, you should be able to see another sign. So we sort of did intersperse them. I think we were up to about 30 signs at Forks of the Credit when we were signing. Since Forks of the Credit staff have joined in 2016, they've now been doing the signage for the park. And then for the private landowners, because it's private properties, you don't have to sign unless there's public access. And so that is something the contractor has taken on. And we have been doing, we've been doing quite a bit in terms of, we haven't done a media campaign, but we've been doing a lot of door knocking and a lot of mail drops. So pretty much anybody in the neighborhoods where we're doing it is aware that we are doing it. So that has helped as well.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Freya.
You're welcome.
I think that's everything. So anyone has maybe one final question, I think we'll wrap up. I think.
Sorry again for the
Yeah,
issue at the beginning.
I'm happy we got it to work, and I hope everyone listening got a lot out of it. And thank you very much for joining. And
Thank
we
you for
have
having me.
our next webinar starting next week. All right. Thank you.